Today, another poem about trains. I'm continuing to read through the compilation edited by Peter Ashley called Railway Rhymes. The poem today is called The Railway Whistle. The Railway Whistle. It's tough to say. The Railway Whistle. The Railway Whistle. Or The Blessings of Hot Water Traveling. And I'm just going to jump right into it today. No dilly-dallying on this podcast. Sometimes I go on a bit of a tangent even before I get to the poem. But not today. Today I'm going right to it. The site where I've linked the poem in the blog page, songsfromtheageofsteam.co.uk, seems to be the perfect site. I just came across it looking for an online version of this text, and it seems to have all kinds of poems and stories and kind of tangential pieces of information from about exactly this same period, the early period of train travel. So when you go to check out the poem, to follow along while I read it, if I ever get around to reading it, check out the rest of the site. It's got stuff about railways, but also canals and riverboats and other cool stuff. I've always thought it would be most excellent to live on a houseboat, like on a canal, perhaps in Cambridge or Ely, on the canals between Ely and Cambridge in Norfolk. I always thought that would be a very suitable life. You know, I'd have my favorite mooring, but then every once in a while I'd be able to pick up and just sort of tootle up and down. I would have my instruments, a little piano, maybe I would get a little upright piano that would fit in there. Much like I have here in this studio, upstairs here. We have a baby grand down in the living room, but up here, where I do all the podcasting, I also have an upright piano, which I use for other projects, as they say. Anyway, straight to it today, no dilly-dallying, as I said. The Railway Whistle, or The Blessings of Hot Water Traveling. Of all the wonders of the age, there is nothing now to match the rage. Both rich and poor seemed all engaged about the Eastern Railway. There's hissing here and whizzing there, and boiling water everywhere. Midst fire and smoke you crack your joke, and what may happen no one cares. For some blow down and some blow up, into a carriage haste and pop. At the sound of the whistle, off you start on the Eastern Counties Railway. There's trains full half a mile in length, drawn by a fiery monster's strength. Good luck to your soul. Keep clear of the banks for fear that you go over. But if by chance such a thing occurs, and you should roll among the furs, how pleasant to be capsized thus, with pigs and passengers in one mess. And while you're down the valley below, how pleasant to hear the engine blow. You mount up again and off you go on the Eastern Counties Railway. But some poor simple souls may say, 'tis a dangerous thing to travel this way. If the rail give way or the boilers burst, there's nothing on earth can save us. The money we paid from our poor pockets may send us in the air like rockets. Our heads as empty as water buckets, our precious eyes knocked out of the sockets. But sure, such people can have no sense. 'Twill all be the same 100 years hence. What odds it will make we can die but once, might as well be smashed by the railway. Farewell, ye coaches, vans, and wagons, farewell, ye keepers of roadside inns. You'll have plenty of time to repent your sins in charging poor travellers double. Farewell, you blustering coachmen and guards that never knew how to use civil words. You'll no more use your horns, except to place upon your brows. Take your lumbering vehicles off the road. Neither you nor they were ever much good. For how could you carry such fine big loads as to the wonderful railways? Let's not forget railway directors, and from all harm they will protect us. They'll study never to neglect us, so dearly they love locomotion. It's for our good they take such pains, and never do they think of gains. And if a few hundred should be slain, our wives and children they'll maintain. Then happy and thankful may we be, such blessed invention we've lived to see. To all other travel bid forever goodbye, but the wonderful Eastern Railways. So that's a nice bit of doggerel, right? Just some actually pretty, I think, inventive rhymes in there that really triple off the tongue, so to speak, once we're done dilly-dallying. I particularly liked the lines around neglect. It's a scathing bit of satire at the expense of railway directors. Let's not forget railway directors, and from all harm they will protect us. They'll study never to neglect us, so dearly they love locomotion. So that's one of the themes in this poem, the avarice of the railway director, who clearly doesn't give a shit about the safety, doesn't give a hoot about the safety of their passengers. They're only looking for the dividends and the astronomical speculation that we heard about in previous poems. But that's all hinged on a social and cultural excitement about the railway. So for sure, this poem recognizes the danger and the avarice of the railway, but it also captures the enthusiasm and the representation of what the railways represented. They were a representation of the future. Much as we've looked at jet travel, or now space travel, or the Hyperloop, going all the way to Star Trek transportation, right? That danger and glamour often go hand in hand with the means of public transportation. And the excitement of being able to go from one place to another without seeming to pass any time, right? The speed with which a train could carry large objects or large crowds of people was miraculous at the time. And look, it continues to be. There is no doubt that the most effective form of public transportation, particularly in terms of commute, would be rapid transit on rail. Right? Last year I read the Robert Caro biography of Robert Moses. Caro, C-A-R-O, is the writer. Robert Moses was the director of various development funds in New York, and that's a gross understatement of the power that he wielded and the impact that he's had on New York City. And one of the impacts he had was that he refused to build adequate trains in and out of Long Island, and instead continued to build wider and wider highways. And it's a known fact that highways simply fill to capacity no matter how wide they are, and don't alleviate transit deficiencies or slowdowns in traffic. They just they elevate them and they maintain them. And then once you've driven in, you have to park. But if you put a train track there that could move many people, particularly if the train came every 3 minutes or every 7 minutes, and then when you're there, they don't have to park. They just go to where they need to be. It's like the path line that goes into the World Trade Center. Leaves every 2 minutes. Boom, boom, bada bing, you're there. I don't live in New York. I travel there for work, and that's the only part of New York I know is that train line, because I fly into Newark, and then I have to figure out how to get into town. And the train is the quickest way. Not the easiest. The easiest is just get in a car and have someone drive you, but the quickest is on the train. So this prophetic idea of being smashed by the railway. I mean, this is a piece of doggerel. I mean, it's a popular poem, but it has this element of futurism, right? the idea of the machine changing the landscape and changing the way that humans interact with the landscape, and giving us new power and new senses, even a new sense organ that is mechanical, that adapts to these enormous sounds and incredible speeds in a way that we didn't have before. So an actual evolution of our exterior senses. And when the verse, the third stanza goes, but sure such people can have no sense. 'Twill all be the same 100 years hence. What odds will it make? We can die but once. Might as well be smashed by the railway. So again, trivial poetry, but touching on a valid cultural idea that this is enormously exciting. The steam engine, this huge beast that carves through the landscape. And then, so we have the avarice of the directors, we have the excitement of the new technology and the expansion of what it means to be a human, right? But what I thought of when I read this poem was kind of a story that I've wanted to write, and not just a single story, but a set of short stories, almost like a James Thurber type of fable collection. And I haven't written it, and I've started taking notes, but the idea would be that at the core, these are stories about how people live together, and what government is, and what is the commonwealth. So all of these poems about the trains, but particularly this one, there's something about this poem and its evocation of the train as culture future, or future culture, but the explicit mention of the industries that are going to go by the wayside, right? The wagoners, the canals, the innkeepers, the disruption on a social scale in terms of employment and the work that people do is simply taken as part of the railway here. But it doesn't have to be that way. And in these stories that I want to write, that's kind of the refrain. It doesn't have to be that way. It didn't have to be that way. Whenever some new technology comes into play, there's a choice that we make. And the choice, unfortunately, is usually not evaluated at the escalated level that it needs to be, right? It's made by vested interests in a way that makes the rest of us feel that this is simply the way that things have to be. But look, there doesn't have to be dual carriageways and multi-lane highways. There are. There doesn't have to be a capitalist marketplace. There is, but it didn't have to be that way. And automation is a really clear example of that, because look, when we come up with infrastructure or technology that does things that people used to do, there's a humane way to introduce it with a humane set of values behind it. Or there's a cruel way of introducing it with an extractive objective behind it. And all too often, our culture chooses that cruel extractive method, which simply says, you had a job, we found a robot that does it. Tough shit. You're out of luck. You're out of work. Should have kept up with the times, right? And then you have a company that now is powered and supported by robots, right? And inevitably that leads to a reduction in the value of the remaining workers, of the workforce in general. It doesn't have to be that way. What if we as a culture made a decision that full employment is not our objective? Full employment is a misinterpretation of Keynesian capitalism. Say that. Those of you who are economists or even people who know what they're talking about, take what I just said as the poetic statement that it was meant to be. There is, well, here's the story that I would tell. I'll just go right into it. There's a village, right, in this world of allegory, there are many villages, and each village produces one thing. And they produce enough of that thing to provide for the people in the village, and then they trade between villages for other commodities. But the village that we're starting with is on a river, and they fish. And every day people go out fishing, and then they bring all the fish that they catch to the central marketplace. Right? And then they divvy it up. Because in this world, fish is what sustains you. And they've started off with the decision that everybody should get 3 fish a day, which they consider to be the minimum amount that you need to survive with health and vigor. Right? 3 fish a day. Everyone goes out and fishes with their rods and reels. And some days you are very lucky and you get 12 fish. Some days you're out there 10 hours, dawn to dusk, and you don't get a single fish. But it doesn't matter. That's the point of the central locations. Everyone brings their fish. And on the days where you caught 12, you leave away with 3. On the days where you caught none, you walk away with 3. It's fine. There's always plenty of fish in aggregate. But it's hard work, because you've got to be out there all day, because you've got to make sure that if you're the person that's catching 12 today, you've got to be out there the time to get the 12, so that the poor guy who's getting none that day, no matter how long they're out there for, there's still food, right? Still fish. So this goes on, and this is great. But then one day, one of the villagers has an idea, right? They see something, and they just have a moment of inspiration, right? In our modern world, they would be called an entrepreneur or an inventor. So this guy says, what if I put my coat into the water and just sat it there? Fish would swim into it. And, over the course of a day, without having to do all the up and down with the rod, I'd catch some fish. Who's to know, right? But then the entrepreneurial spirit takes over, and he says, what if I went upstream a bit, put a big net across the river, caught all the fish? Look at that. I've got all the fish. Okay, so this is the choice, right? I could say, I've got all the fish. What are you going to do about it? I've caught the fish. And then a whole structure builds up around the idea that I own those fish. And if you want the fish, you've got to give me your potatoes or your backgammon boards or your diesel fuel or whatever it is that you have that I want. You've got to give it to me in order to get the fish. And more than that, you've got to look after that net for me to earn the value that you're going to use to buy those fish from me. And you see where that goes, right? That's a whole set of fables. But what you could do instead is the guy could come running back to the village, say, everybody, look at this, right? If we all worked 1 hour a day each month, right? There's enough people here. It takes a couple hours to empty this net with a couple of people. We don't need the whole village to work all day, every day, to get the fish that we need. We just need a couple of people a day to take care of this, bring the fish back to the marketplace, and let us divvy it up. That's like 2 hours a month instead of 10 hours a day. Man, I would say, look, we can get all the fish we need and never really have to work again. We can sleep, we can write poetry, we can make podcasts, we can smoke cigarettes and drink absinthe, we can fuck all we want. The fish town, the fish village has got it made because of this invention, this automation of our tasks. We have everything that we had before, but we all don't have to work for it. And, we never make that choice as a culture. Instead, we go off in the other place where we end up with a factory processing the fish and people working in the factory to process the fish, to earn money, to buy the fish from the person who owns the fish. But nobody owns the fish. It's the commonwealth. Someone invented an idea, a way to extract the value from that commonwealth with very little effort. And what it should mean then, and this is where I'll wrap up, the automation in our culture, whether it's self-checkout desks or vending machines, all of those things mean that gradually we should be working less and less. And instead we're working the same or more for less and less. And that value is getting siphoned off up to the railway directors. So fuck them. Jeez. Anyway, good poem. We'll continue with this. If you like the podcast, subscribe. Go to zenglop.net. There's a big button there that says subscribe, or you can subscribe in iTunes or whatever else you use. Drop me a note, zenglop@gmail.com. And you can also reach me on Twitter. So, thanks everybody. Talk to you later.